Welcome to Missions Life, where we share resources and encouragement for current missionaries, future missionaries, and those praying for missionaries. Missions can be hard, and we want to help you face the challenges of life, leadership, and ministry. We want your life to bear fruit for the gospel wherever you are. I'm Kyle Ferran, here with my co-host and wife, Heather. Well, today on the podcast, we have with us Paul and Martha Davis. Paul and Martha have served in pastoral ministry since 1989, and in their lifetime of ministry, they've led church plants, Christian schools, and dynamic ministry teams. Additionally, they've given oversight to children's, youth, and college and career ministries. They enjoy pace-setting leadership as well as serving as educators, conference speakers, and ministry trip facilitators. In 2017, Paul became the 7th president of ABWE, Association of Baptists for World Evangelism. And today, Paul and Martha are working hard to meet, support, and encourage the ABWE Global team, striving to embolden gospel-centered churches to become sending and supporting churches, connecting God-enabled donors to the missionary projects on our fields, and humbly working to build, heal, and reignite relationships with ABWE partners, past, present, and future. The Davises have 4 adult children who are maturing believers in Jesus Christ. Paul and Martha, it's a real joy for us to have you guys on the podcast today. So welcome.
It's good to be with you.
Thanks for having us.
Well, as we kind of step into some of these questions, we just wanted to start off with this: is how did God move you from pastoring a church to being president of a mission agency?
Yeah, we joking around say, with kicking and screaming, but that isn't entirely accurate. We had always, every time there had been a missions conference at our church, or we'd been talking with missionaries, or a missionary would come and visit, we would always have the conversation, hey, is mission something for us? And we had always said, if the Lord called us into missions, we'd be willing to go. And so we had an open door. We actually pushed on a couple of doors several times. I don't want to say it wasn't so much recruited as opportunities were presented to us. And we pushed on some of those doors, and they didn't seem to open. And then serving on the board of ABWE, the opportunity to serve as president. Well, that caused a problem because I had never been a missionary before. Martha had never been a missionary before. We were asked to serve as the president of a missions organization, and we felt wholly unqualified. Like, what in the world are we going to do leading a missions agency when we've never been missionaries? And yeah, yes, we've sent missionaries. Yes, we've supported missionaries. Yes, we've visited and been a part of short-term missions things, but like long-term, give your life to Jesus, move to a foreign country, learn a language, invest in a culture, raise your family on the field, like that, zero experience with that. And so we had to balance this. Okay, so what if God calls you to something that you feel unqualified for? And I guess what I didn't realize at the time, you guys, is that like almost every missionary feels like that, right?
Absolutely.
Like we're going to go to this. We don't know the language. We don't know. God is calling us, and we're just going to be obedient. And I think, again, while we're not missionaries, I think the call felt very much like what many missionaries do. We went into it with fear and trepidation, feeling like, God has equipped us and given us gifts, but this is over our head. But if He wants us in this, we'll do it, and we'll jump in, and we'll move our family, and we'll engage in this ministry for as long as the Lord would have us.
There was a level of the unexpected. It was very unexpected, the timing of it. There's a whole story behind that. And we had to really wrestle through this whole idea of, Paul has been preaching to our church at the time. We had been there for 21 years, I believe, 21 years, somewhere around there. And at that time, we had walked many people through making this decision. And now all of a sudden we're faced with, if we say, the easy thing would have been to stay. Our ministry
Hmm.
was flourishing. It was going great. We loved the people that we were serving. We loved what we were doing. There was no earthly reason for us to leave. And so we really had to wrestle through, are we the biggest hypocrites in the world if we say, no, we won't do this? We're going to stay where we're at. Because we'd always taught our people, when God asks something of you, obedience is the key. We taught our children that it's about
Mm.
obedience. So we got to wrestle through that in a whole different way.
Yeah, we had students from our youth ministry that had given their lives to missions, that had, we had adults from our church
Mm-hmm.
that had done that.
Right.
And, so for us, I think initially we just said no, right? It's like,
Mm.
Hmm.
We've
we're unqualified. We don't know what we're doing. No. And,
we've no reason.
but then as we started thinking about it, would us be saying no just like anybody else being called? And so then we began praying about it, and from there it's just all downhill.
Well, we're really glad that you guys said yes.
Thank you.
We have definitely learned over the years that there was one of my college professors who used to say our answer needs to be yes before God's ever spoken.
Mm,
And I thought that was always really good, and that's always been our default to try to live that. But I'd never realized how many times you'd have to say yes.
right, right.
You think you go, as you guys stepped into ministry, you're in the pastorate, but there's the necessity to always be willing to say yes again. And sometimes every time is usually not a step on the same level. It's usually a step up
Yeah.
of responsibility, of like, wow, that's really over my head now.
Mm.
And so that was something that we've learned. And he
Yeah,
didn't
I had to
mention
say
how many
yes
times you
10
had to say yes.
I had to say yes 10 times just today. So
and
Yeah,
on most days, Heather, we're happy we said yes too. Most days.
Got it. I hear
yes.
ya.
it's good. That's good. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's it's neat to kind of just hear how God worked in you through that process. And I think that
Mm,
all missionaries and anyone in ministry, whatever
right,
ministry it is, it's
right,
the qualification is feeling unqualified, and that's one of the
right.
preliminary steps there. Um, as you guys stepped into this role and serving there, what has surprised you about missionary life?
I think the biggest surprise, and there's a lot of places that we could go here, but um, as we've gotten to know more and more missionaries, more and more teams, and more places, uh, I'm amazed at the level of diversity and the amount of ministries that each missionary engages in. Um, and let me give you an example. Like let's say we supported Kyle and Heather, and we said, well, what did Kyle and Heather do? Well, they're regional directors for ABWE. Okay, so that's what we think. Okay. We don't think of Kyle and Heather also working with a Christian school, also working with a local team in Portugal, also doing podcasts, also doing leadership teaching at a headquarters in Harrisburg, you know, also being personal evangelists in your everyday life. Also, all of a sudden regional director does not describe what the Friends do in any, and I probably missed 10 things. And that's the thing that surprises me is, we go to visit a missionary in Germany and we think, oh, what are they doing? Oh, they're planting a church. Yeah, but they're also leading this ministry and doing that and involved there and working with this national partner. And yes, they're planting a church, but there's all of these ancillary ministry opportunities that every missionary I know is engaged in.
Hmm.
And, you know, and I'll just be transparent as a pastor. When somebody told me they were a church planter, I was like, okay, so they're planting a church. Um, I didn't realize they were doing this community development piece and this, outreach with this other national partner and this and And so that was a pleasant surprise, um, to see, uh, because I think pastors wonder and worry, are we getting our money's worth with our missionary?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and to my great delight, not only are they getting their money's worth, but they don't even know half of what's being done. You don't
Mm.
Uh,
you don't see because you can't put it. There's not enough space in a newsletter, and if you did put
exactly.
everything in a newsletter, nobody would read all the way to the bottom of the 10th page, right? So, so that surprised me.
Yeah. I think one of the things that surprised me, it's going to sound counter to what Paul said, but I think follow with me on this thought. How many of the tasks and everyday ministry development were exactly what that top percent in your church, what they're doing as well? Building
Mm.
relationships, telling others about Christ, working in this children's program, establishing this, starting that. So, very much like Paul said, our missionaries are doing a wide variety of things, but so much of that, that's what
Be church
we
people.
we wanted you doing that in your churches before you ever said yes to going to another culture. There's
Mhm.
other stressors, of course. There's other implications. The long travel, I didn't take 14-hour plane rides when we were doing church ministry. I do now. There are different things that, don't match up. But I think the core of what you're doing, so much of that translates what we were doing previously. And
Mm.
that was a surprise, a good surprise. I think sometimes people get this idea, oh, I don't, missions is this thing. I don't think I could do that. There's something eerie or special about it. And it's when you really boil it down, you really look at it, these are the things that you should be doing in your everyday life at the core of making disciples, at the core.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's the fear factor in missions is the, cross-cultural living and learning a language and can I actually do that? But, the heartbeat of missions is the same as the heartbeat of the church.
that's
Let's
right.
be relational. Let's present Christ. Let's be in our communities. It all interrelates and it's all the same. It should take the scary out of missions. Yeah, there's a
That's,
different language and there's culture, which is a big deal,
it
and
is a
there's the
big deal.
cross-cultural stresses and
Sure.
such. But foundationally, we do a lot of the same things. We're
And
the same
that's,
people. We're normal.
that was, and
Yeah.
that was the
Right.
surprise, right? And in a good way, a good surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you said also kind of highlights the importance there of as people are thinking about praying about missions, first step is actually doing it where you are.
Mm.
That's right.
Because if you're not doing it there, it's not you're not going to have a transcontinental metamorphosis and all of a sudden
Right.
start doing it.
Right.
It needs to start where they're at, and so that's
That's
a
right.
great point that you brought out there.
Yeah. So this next question kind of dovetails a little bit into what we were talking about. Knowing what you know now, the things that surprised you, the things that you've learned being on so many different fields. What would you share or encourage sending churches with about missions? Like what maybe do they don't know that would be really helpful for them to know?
Yeah, and I don't know if this relates to my first answer, but there's something that I'm regularly engaging with churches and pastors, so I'm having this conversation a lot. I think one of the most important things for missionaries on the field when it comes to their church is that their home church, their sending church, their supporting churches are healthy churches. Um, so many of our missionaries, again, as I talk with them, like, how are you doing? I'm doing great, but my home church, my sending church is collapsing because we had a bad pastoral transition, or,
Mm.
um, we've been without a pastor for, 3 years. And, I came back and nobody we know is there. And, um, all of these different dynamics that happen when churches aren't healthy. And I think when I talk with churches, I'm like, guys, send well. And there's all kinds of things that we can talk about, what does it mean for a church to send well and support well and things like that. But it has to come from a place of the church loving Jesus Christ with all of its heart, putting the church in Ephesus, maintaining your first love, but then also being a healthy church, because um, sending and supporting from unhealthy churches, causes a lot of fear and frustration for missionaries on the field, as they, do I need to find a new sending church? Do I, will they drop my support? They might be a significant part of my support, and these weigh heavy. Does my pastor love me anymore? Does the pastor of my sending church remember us? Does he even know us? Will he drop us? All of these, some of these questions are, I think, natural fears when a church is unhealthy. So,
And to dovetail along that, my point, we didn't even discuss this beforehand, but is we tell sending churches often when they ask, what can we do for our missionaries? And one of the things I tell them is get to know them as people.
Yeah.
And because when you're a real person, when they have that kind of relationship with you, there's a different level of accountability, of understanding, of I've talked to several of our missionaries, and one of the questions I ask is, what's your relationship like with your sending church? You can imagine I get all kinds of answers, everything from they send a check to I had a conversation not long ago, and one of the young ladies, she shared with me, she said, Martha, we have the most amazing sending church. They check in on us on a regular basis. The pastors call and they ask us, how are you doing in your marriage? We know ministry's tough. How are your kids doing? They know their kids by name. It's not a is everything perfect? Because we all know, if life happens, it is life. It's messy. But it's this relationship that they have with their people that if something is troublesome or hard, you know who this missionary runs to? They run to their
Yeah.
sending church. And they run to those people that they know love them, are encouraging them, they are investing in them. The amount of money that this church is giving them, it's not just the money. It's about the relationship. It's about that whole they know us as people and they love us and we're an extension of them. And when I hear that, I encourage churches, because often those that are asking me is because they want to have this relationship be strong and healthy.
yeah.
That's good.
I remember the first time in South Africa that we had to send out the prayer letter that had a pretty urgent prayer request. You send out that mass email,
Yeah.
and when your sending church responds, when those people that respond, they're like, "We've got you. We're praying for you." It reduced me to tears. That ocean feels really big when there's a problem, and it was our first problem. And man,
Right.
I wish churches knew how much that constant prayer, but telling us we are praying for you, and specifically,
Yeah.
means the world.
Yeah.
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 And this particular person who I was referencing, that's one of the things that their pastors do with them on this, I think it's every 2-month call, is they pray with them. They share their burdens and then together they pray about it right then and there. It's just that extra boost of encouragement, right? From the
Yeah,
people that are sending you out, that they're that engaged, that invested in you as people.
right.
And ministries and churches that run towards the problem,
Hmm.
like you said, you shared a concern or a problem that was happening. When someone runs toward that problem with you, um, that is a deep and rich blessing, as opposed to just, and I get it. We say, well, if there's anything that we can do, let us know, right? That's helpful, and if things get really, really bad, I know Kyle and Heather, it's gonna get really, really bad before you guys start complaining, and start, because you guys are tough individuals, right? But to have someone run towards that with you, hey, we're sharing this. This is a need. This is a problem, and having somebody run towards that, man, that's a huge ministry.
It really helps with discouragement. And I know, part of one of our hats we wear in our role is really trying to pick up on missionaries that are getting discouraged,
Hmm.
because if you can
Right.
step into that space before they've already left the field. But churches, churches that have a relationship with their missionaries long term, they're the ones that knew them before they came to the field.
Yeah.
They're really key in picking up on that discouragement. It's such an important partnership for missionary health, for sending churches to be that involved. So I'm really glad we're having this discussion right now.
Yeah.
And sometimes just the simple act of praying, but then letting the missionary know, hey, I am praying. It lets people know, oh, people did actually read the prayer letter.
Right.
Did it just go out into the cyberspace void and just vanish, or did people actually care enough to read and stuff like that?
Right.
As you were talking there, it reminded me that we have over the years kind of collected a bunch of different debriefing type questions that we use with our missionaries, but they're also could be really, really helpful for church missions boards, kind of doing some debriefings with their missionaries. So in the show notes, we'll put a link to that as just a PDF if churches want to be able to grab that and use it. Typically, we don't go through all the questions because you ask one question and it answers 3 or 4 of them. But so we'll put that on there if churches want to be able to use that. It's a very, very simple way to
show love.
To show love, to care for missionaries and create that relationship that you were talking about there, and the opportunity for that. So that was really good. That just what you said reminded me of that there. What could missionaries do to better communicate with their churches, or what do you wish they would maybe say more to their churches?
Yeah. I wish missionaries would do better communicating their little wins.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
The everyday stuff, the
mundane,
the mundane. Again, we were talking about, Martha mentioned, the things that we're expecting missionaries to do are the things that we expect our church people to do, right? Like all a missionary is a really, really good church member on the other side of the world, right? I mean, that's really all they are. And I think missionaries do a great job sharing, okay, hey, we had a big win, we had 5 people get baptized. Well, nobody in my church is going to be a part of 5 people getting baptized. They're going to be a part of maybe sharing their faith one afternoon over coffee, and they're super stoked about this is the first real gospel conversation they've had with this person in their lifetime, and they've known them. We've been friends all of our lives, right? And that's a little win. And I read a lot of missionary letters, and I see a lot of these big things that I'm excited about. So don't get me wrong, share the big wins too, right?
for sure.
But some of these little wins, I was reading the Bible to my children at night, and my daughter for the first time, asked questions about the Lord. Again, these are things that people, supporters back home, people who are reading missionary letters, they see that and they're saying, you know what, I could read to my daughter, and maybe she'll start doing that as well. And so I think there's so many little wins that get lost because we think, well, we have to communicate. It's got to be something good. It's our prayer letter, and I do it, right? Because I have to send out a monthly. And what do I share in my monthly? All the big stuff,
The highlight reel, right?
Right. It's the highlight reel. But, don't miss out on a couple of those little wins. I think they encourage people more than we realize.
I was talking to some of your teammates in England, and Allie was telling me how they were introducing American football to their church and community group, and how something as simple as stoic people taking cowbells in coming as support for the kiddos on this team that are part of their church, and how just something as simple as drawing and creating team and creating unity within their church around something like American football. Her story is much better than the one I just conveyed to you. But those are ways those are mundane things of life, right? Our kids are going to be participating on teams. They're going to be part of things. But in that, how can we share the gospel and create relationships strong enough that we can share the gospel in the future? I think those are when I think of mundane, those are the things we do it, but we don't really talk
Mm-hmm.
about it,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And to share that with your church so that they see, it's all these little opportunities that mount up to those big express wins.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the other thing,
I love that. Oh, go
no, go
ahead.
ahead.
I just
It's
love
always,
that you guys have just said that, because I don't think I've ever had someone say, "Hey, include some of the really small
Mm-hmm.
things, that can be relatable to
That was
across
the
the
word I was
board."
thinking of,
Very
relatable.
relatable, and once again, removing the scary out of
Right.
missionary.
that's right.
Right.
I think the other thing that I would encourage, and I do encourage our missionaries when I talk to them, make sure you're showing your passion for what you're doing. Sometimes it becomes a task that we report. Sometimes it becomes you have six sending churches, so you're reporting 6 times the exact same information. Don't forget to bring the passion.
Yeah.
It takes a passion for you to pick up your family, move across the world, and do what you're doing. Don't ever drop that when you're speaking with your churches. Churches love, human beings love to communicate and interact with people that are passionate about what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And missionaries are, but you get home on, home ministry, and you've traveled halfway around the country, and you're exhausted, and you've shared your report 10 times, and you're doing it one more time. And so I get how, like, passion drains, but it's important.
It is.
So
It is.
Yeah, no, that's good. Kind of along those same lines, what are some other things that you see missionaries do or can do to keep developing a good relationship with their sending church? Any ideas for us?
I think this is going to sound so simplistic, but ask your church, what can I do for you? How can I come alongside and serve you? And they may be caught on their heels going, wait a minute. Why are you asking that? But be genuine about it. And it may look as simple as pointing them to resources. Kyle, you mentioned you're going to put the link here. One
Yeah.
of the things that we're doing here at ABWE is we're trying to create resources for our churches, resources to give to them, because we're taking their people. We take their
True.
money, right? We're always take. What if we turn that whole scenario and say, what can we do for you? And in giving them these resources, ways that they can build their missions teams, that they can build their missions. We've got our blogs, all of the
Yeah,
resources.
well, this podcast is a good example. This has an opportunity to be a great tool for missions committees and pastors and churches. As a pastor, I spend a lot of time, thinking through, okay, hey, what's our vision for the future missions wise, and working through that, and having a resource like this, can be very valuable.
We had a missionary and his family that came to us. We had a missions house that we would give
Okay.
free of charge to missionaries. And we were not supporting these people, but our missions house was open and we welcomed them. They didn't just live there. They walked across the street and they participated in the women's Bible study. She didn't lead it, but she got filled up by it. And she got to participate with other women. In her participation, people saw and heard their heart. They jumped into vacation Bible school. It's a crazy, wild week at our church. It was big, it was huge. And they were like, can we jump in? Can we be a part? They got to know so many people in our church that they were a part of our church. And we weren't supporting them. But you know what? A year later,
We were supporting them.
we were supporting them. And there were all kinds of individuals in the church saying, well, I'm going to support them. Of course I am, because they got to know them as people. But in that, it's because they were serving a church that didn't even give them anything. And I think if we ask that question of what can we do for you?
Yeah, I would say, I would tell missionaries to say, come visit us.
Mhm.
As a pastor, I wanted to visit all of my missionaries, and sometimes I didn't know if I could. I mean, I knew that I could, but do they want me? Do they, and so I would tell missionaries, if you want to have relationships with churches that are growing and flourishing, invite people from the church to come visit. And I know it can interrupt ministry, and I know, um, we can talk about the pluses and minuses of short-term trips, etc. But I'm not talking about short-term mission trips as much as I am relational engagement. Spending time. Uh, the missionaries that we did go visit, we ended up being, for them, a lot of the times, a lot of the problems they were dealing with, we weren't a part of the problem. We weren't even a part of the solution, but we were friendly listeners who came alongside and just loved on them as they worked through the problems, concerns, worries, cares of ministry.
Yeah.
And we were able to pray for them, get to know them, encourage them. And I'll tell you, and I think you guys know this, if somebody spends a couple days in your house or with you and they come visit, your relationship is different from then on out.
It's forever changed.
You've got a connecting point there of shared experience, and they understand a bit more of where you've been.
Right.
Completely different level of understanding.
Yeah.
The Davises and the Frans have had many meals together, and our relationship is different than it would be, just knowing each other, because we've broken bread together, and we've shared, and I've seen your kids, and seen your kids in a variety of different places and all over the world, traveled with you a little bit, Kyle, a little bit more than I wanted to, maybe. No. No, but just that dynamic, I think, I would, if I'm encouraging a missionary and you want to build relationships with your churches, invite them. I don't know that there's lots of other things you could do, but I don't know that there's a more intensive, quick turnaround on investment of time, effort, and energy than that.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting, a really good idea. And I think some people may kind of, as missionaries, may struggle with how to ask that, or even pastors how to ask that without the caveat of, "Hey, I want to come do something," because that's kind of like that. They feel like they need to come do something or offer that. But is there a way that either pastors could offer to come, or missionaries could ask people to come if they don't have anything for them to do? How could they do that in a way that would be I'm getting at there, how to invite or invite other people, or invite yourself in a way that would be able to explain that well, or
I think what you guys are doing with this podcast might be a good way to do it. I know, as a pastor, if you called me up as one of my missionaries and said, "Hey, would you and maybe a small team be willing to come out? We'd really like to pick your brain on some mission topics. We're constantly thinking about how we want to do missions, and we'd really love a good team of good people that are thinking missions. Come out. We'll take you out to a restaurant. We'll show you around. We'll have a good time. But we want a couple evenings just to be able to pick your brain on some missions topics. Come up with 10 questions. And really what you're doing is you're setting the table for a deepening relationship, which I think that's its own reward right there. But also you're getting to hear from people who are thinking about ministry. Your pastor is thinking about ministry all the time, and you're getting to pick his brain, very much like you do with these podcasts. I'm sure you guys are learning a lot.
That's one of the things we love about this.
Right. And you're gaining wisdom every time you ask questions. And so I think that's the way that would be the suggestion I would make.
Okay.
And I think often when the concern is what can we do, what we're really saying is there's a financial investment in making this trip.
Mm-hmm.
We want
a good return on investment.
We want to make sure the ROI is there, right? And so I think to be understanding of that, and so you show them, introduce them to your partners, and you introduce them and show them around, and so that they feel like they know you better, but they also know your ministry and can share that more.
Mm. Yeah, that's good.
And just a little plug to put it out there, not wanting to leave out the missionary kids, our MKs, and the impact that visiting pastors who are there just to be relational and see the ministry and encourage the family, it has a huge impact on missionary kids.
Right.
And we have an alarming rate of MKs that are coming back to America and walking away from the American church. This is a brilliant way to relationship build with our MKs. I mean, it was incredibly meaningful when people from America were in our home, and our kids really valued that time, and then felt connected to that church, also felt connected to American culture in a little bigger way. So,
Sure.
I mean, not just the ministry to us on the field, but also the MKs.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
So, another question for you guys is, we all minister in different areas, but as you guys travel around, what are some of the common struggles that you see that missionaries are facing, and what encouragement would you like to share with them? You've probably shared it with some of them, but maybe you could pass it on to even more people through this.
Yeah. Probably the most common struggle or difficulty that we run into is miscommunication. We've talked a little bit about communication, but there is a language that pastors and sending churches speak, and there is a language that missionaries speak, and both of them are in English, but they're different languages. And
The same word does not mean the same thing.
And I'm amazed at the level of miscommunication that can happen, and it causes a lot of, a lot of our leadership dollars. When you think of like spending, our ministry dollars that we're spending with pastors, and I'm not talking actual dollars. I'm talking about the ministry capital, the time, effort, and energy that we're pouring into churches. Many times it's little miscommunications, it's or timing of communication, or I should have told this person this before I did that, and um, again, or maybe perhaps the church is unhealthy, and there's poor communication to the missionary, and that causes hurt feelings, and there's all of these dynamics, all of the dynamics that miscommunication really creates. We see that a lot. It breeds a lot of discouragement, which breeds doubt and distrust, and sometimes we can begin doubting the intentions. So even when things start moving in the right direction, there's a constant, well, are they doing this because they have to, or because they love us, and vice versa, right? And so, um, when I encourage pastors and missionaries, I tell them, look, you've got to talk. We've got to be talking more. And this would go back to that visit. Like if there's relational struggles or doubts or worries or fears with a church, missionaries visiting them or them visiting the field, um, just lots of opportunities for healing.
Picking up the phone, emails and texts. We have so many avenues of communication. Yet, how many times are all of those avenues misinterpreted? A Facebook message, a text, a tweet, Instagram, but whatever. Let's do the old fashioned thing and pick up the phone when those tough things happen, because then you hear their heart. Then you hear there's explanation, not just black and white words of a text or of an email. And I know Paul and I, we use technology a lot. We're communicating with people in many, many countries all over the United States. But there are times we just pick up the phone and we chat the old fashioned way. And so many times that produces a sweetness in that relationship. It builds trust in those relationships. And there's a lot of encouragement that goes both ways with that.
And you guys know, being in missionary leadership roles, sometimes we just have to send people somewhere to help have the conversation in person, and because talk on the phone is better than an email. But what's better than talking on the phone? Being there in person, if you can. And so I think that's, if you're thinking of areas where we see the most, it would be in that.
I think one of the things as well that I see, I have, a variety of conversations with a variety of people. There's a lot of loneliness. And loneliness is common in all fronts here. Lead pastors are lonely. They may have a whole team of people working with them, but they're lonely. You can be in the center of a room full of people and still be lonely. Our missionary wives often, they feel very alone in raising their children. They, am I doing this right? How can I do this better? What am I missing? And that creates, and I think Satan loves to use that to breed discouragement when we get lonely. And I see it on the church side of things. I also see it on the missions side where people are lonely.
Yeah. No, that's really good. We see that commonly in our region, that brought up.
Yeah, and those are little things, like you said, that the little discouragements. Those are the things that build, and if left unchecked, that becomes the new story that people tell themselves, and that story just starts repeating itself, and then it becomes reality to them because they've told themselves that story so many times they believe it.
Right.
And that's oftentimes the steps to starting looking in other directions and heading back to the States. And many times you don't hear about it till it's too late. So if we as leaders or as churches haven't had those conversations with them about those discouragements, to let them air those or to provide other perspectives, it just builds. And that's so many times why people leave the field, that discouragement that builds and builds, and it becomes that it's a back reason. You may not hear about it later, but it's there, and it's playing often.
Well, and I think it's one of those things that the enemy loves to use, right? God created us to be in relationship, to be in relationship with others. But that loneliness piece, our reaction is to pull into ourselves. I can't tell anybody else about this because then I'm weak, or, I'm the loser of the group, right? We don't ever say that, but that's what we say to ourselves. And how many times we just will pull further and further away, thinking I'm the only one struggling with this, versus being transparent and checking in. How are others doing? If you're struggling with it, guess what? Somebody else probably is too. And coming alongside a coworker, a teammate, even from afar, checking in and saying, "Hey, how you doing? I'm struggling with this. How are you doing with it? What are you doing to help work through this?" And I think when we're bold enough to have those conversations, we don't let the enemy have satisfaction in getting us off singled and alone on our own.
Yeah, that's really good.
I used to tell pastors' wives often, I would, when we were in church, I would meet with other wives, and I would bring this up for discussion because I knew it was something that I, had to regularly address. And without fail, it was a constant, "Oh, yeah. That's typical," but there was something about when we left that time of fellowship together, we had a new understanding for each other. We would pray for each other. We would encourage. And how many times women would throw each other a quick little text, just as a, "Hey, thinking about you today." That breaks the loneliness barrier, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And so it's the little things.
And so many times, we all think that we're the only one. But if we're struggling with it, there's probably a good chance that, half the room is also struggling with it.
Yeah. Right.
So it's, taking that first step to just vocalize it to other people is, it it gives them courage then to even say, well, yeah, me too, and
It does.
build so much deeper relationships
Yeah.
there.
Don't buy into the lie of Satan that you're the only one. You're not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well said. What are some different trends that you guys are observing in missions? You guys have an opportunity. We were just talking before we got on. You were traveling around East Asia and all over the place in the Philippines, and you have lots of opportunities in your role to be able to observe missions. What are some of the trends that you're observing in missions? And they could be good and they could be bad, and they don't have to be even isolated to just even our mission agency, but just in general in missions. What are some trends you're observing, and then maybe what trends are you seeing in churches that missionaries also should be aware of? Because
Yeah.
you mentioned like that language of churches and missionaries. Sometimes we come back after 4 years and it's like, whoa, what happened here? Uh, this didn't used to be this way. So what are some trends you're seeing missions and churches?
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a pet peeve. It's a little bit of a frustration, and it's a little bit of a trend. So you're going to get a threefer. Okay.
That's fine.
Great.
That's fine.
In the last 7 years, our organization, ABWE, has mobilized over 420 missionaries. Okay. So if you do the math, that means that we're an organization of about 1,000 missionaries. That means about 40% of our entire population of missionaries is in their first term. In their first 7 years. You think if if it takes 6 months to go through the candidate process, a couple of years for pre-field ministry, maybe a year of language school, then you're in your first ministry. So we've got a large pool of missionaries that are what I'd call freshman class for sure, right?
Yeah.
That requires a lot of leadership on our part. And here's my frustration trend, situation. I'm finding it different. Churches aren't as willing to fund missionary leadership as they are. They're looking for a young missionary or going to an unreached people group, which I get. I want to, support that, right? But that new young missionary needs help. And to send them
Absolutely.
to an unreached people group, that the reason it's unreached is because it's extremely difficult to either live there or to reach them, or the language is difficult, the political climate is difficult, the religious adhesion amongst the culture is difficult. There's a reason that's an unreached people group. To leave that young missionary alone with no help, oversight, accountability, structure, support, encouragement, pouring into them, I think that it's a recipe for success. And we need missionary leaders in our organization because of all of God's doing a cool thing. We're seeing tremendous mobilization. I'm excited about it. I praise the Lord. But it's bringing a need of, we need qualified and capable leaders, preferably with missions experience, right? Who God has gifted to be able to lead, to be able to take 10, 20, 30, in your guys' case, 40, 50, 60,
90.
families.
90.
90, yeah.
Or not 90 families,
90
individuals.
Right. To take and to help shepherd them, to help local churches shepherd their missionaries. And so I think this is a trend. We see gifts of leadership. We have an experienced missionary. They're just like, yes, I'd love to care for 90 missionaries and help them, flourish and catalyze their ministry. I'd love to do that. And then they go to their church and they say, hey, we've got an opportunity to not just have a ministry to one field in one region, but to help an entire 5-country area with 90 missionaries. We're going to expand our ministry. God is so good. And they're like, no. I mean, you're not going to be, reaching your people group. And I'm being a little harsh. Okay. It's never like that. Okay. But we're seeing this trend where, um, again, and I don't know how to say it, this is probably not, as we elevate people to leadership roles, as we say, hey, would you come out and serve these 90 people, and then would you serve these 400 people, in leadership? It gets more and more difficult, for those leaders to get support from churches. And so I would encourage, any pastor that's listening, if a missions organization says we need this couple for leadership, um, and you're thinking, well, this may not fit in our strategy because we're only targeting unreached people groups, but you have a relationship with this couple, I would say think about the multiplied impact. You know, um, Pastors aren't supposed to do the work of the ministry. They're supposed to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, right? So, so do pastors do ministry? Yes, but they're really overseeing a flock of people who will do the work of the ministry. And missionary leaders are very similar. Every missionary leader I know is still doing mission work and wherever they're at, but they're also overseeing the flock and helping the flock to do the work of the ministry. And so very much like a shepherd in a church is catalyzing ministry within the body of Christ. Missionary leaders are catalyzing ministry and mission all over the world. We need them. Especially our organization, ABWE, we've got 400 plus new missionaries that without qualified, capable leadership, they're going to be on their own struggling. And we'll do the work to train and develop. We just need churches back home to see the importance of it as well. That was a long answer to a short question.
It was good. It reminded me just recently someone in the member care department, Ken Lowe, shared a statistic. And this is across all mission agencies, but he said about 50% of first-term missionaries return to the States during their first term. And most of those are for preventable reasons. Team conflict, struggling marriages, family-related issues, or unmet expectations.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about all the time that takes, like you're talking about, the training, the support raising, you get to the field. Even when you get to the field, you've got 2 to 3 years sometimes of language learning.
Right.
So in the first 4 years, you're really getting like a year, maybe 2 years of like actually getting into ministry. And if there's anything we can do as organizations and as leaders to help keep people on the field,
Right.
If churches are just sending out people but aren't helping those people to stay there by having the leadership that they need to have there to equip them, to encourage them, that's sunk cost. I mean, you're going to be losing that. You're losing that because they're going to be coming back to the States before they even really get their stride in ministry. And so that is so important.
Yeah, and how many of those preventable reasons can good, godly, loving leadership help? Right?
There's a lot.
Probably many, if not all.
Yeah. Yeah, and that combination of the supporting church, sending churches, having their back on things, and having that relationship and helping them that way because they're a safe space there, but also doing the leadership on the field, that joint effort there to help keep those first term missionaries. If they make it through that first term, the likelihood or statistics of people actually sticking it out much longer goes up enormously. And so just that especially those new missionaries is so vital.
Yeah, it's good.
I think you asked the second question is trends in churches. What are some of the trends in churches? And I think one of the things that we are seeing is because churches are restructuring how frequently they meet or when they have their full group of their Sunday morning service. Many don't have Sunday evenings anymore. Often missionaries on either on pre-field or coming back to raise additional support, whatever, they're frustrated because they can't get a church service. But what they're not understanding is they're not going to get that church service because that pastor has greatly reduced the amount of church services he has available to him. But instead of asking for the upfront in front of everyone, think strategically, building relationships, know who the decision makers in your sending churches, home churches, supporting churches are. They may be the missions pastor.
And they're often not the senior pastor.
They're often not the senior pastor, but that's where we go, right? Because that's the name on the website, or that's the name we've always known. And so be looking for who are those decision makers. And then also there are so many amazing opportunities within, some people call them community groups, some call them small groups. Most churches, many churches that we're in, they have some form of that. Or they call them adult Bible fellowship classes instead of Sunday school classes. Those are great opportunities to have an audience of 20 to 50 people that you can have really intimate conversations with. You can share those good stories that can't be put online, especially if you're in a difficult country, restricted access, etc. But there are some really great ways to build relationships within that church that don't include being on the platform at 11 a.m. And those are trends that we're seeing. And when missionaries understand that, they're finding that success rate much greater.
No,
they're
that's
building
really good.
relationships too. Sometimes even maybe deeper ones too. That's a good point.
It's all about relationships, right? You're going to get to know those people well, and you can be much more personal in those environments as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that advice. We're going to go just a little bit different direction with this question, but Paul, we've heard you speak on strength before. When you talk to the missionaries on strength, like how does that relate to the mission field? What are actually you going after with that?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm learning, don't want to say that I've arrived here and by any stretch of the imagination, that I'm learning is that the scriptures encourage us to be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Why does the scriptures encourage us to be strong? I think because many of the things that lead towards discouragement, the things that lead towards quitting, the things that lead towards failure, the things that lead towards um, ministry that isn't flourishing, it's related to weakness. The ability to endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ, right? The ability to persevere, the ability to overcome affliction and discouragement, and I'm not talking just physical strength, and I'm not talking just emotional or mental strength. I'm talking about the whole package, developing yourself physically, emotionally, and mentally to be able to stand, Ephesians 6, against the fiery darts of the evil one. And for missionaries and for ministry people to think that we're not going to face hardship, that we're not going to face persecution, that we're not going to face difficulty, that we're not going to face tiredness, that we're not going to face um, false accusation. I mean, all kinds of things that get thrown at us to discourage us. And um, unless we develop an inner strength mentally, emotionally, and physically, one of those things is going to get us. And it may not look like failure. It may just look like quitting, or it may just look like staying on the field and being lazy. Um, I mean, there's so many ways that weakness can show up and bring hardship to ministry or ineffectiveness to ministry. And I'm not saying you have to be, a bodybuilder. I'm just talking about you have to develop mental toughness. You have to develop emotional toughness. You have to know how to take criticism and not blow a gasket if someone criticizes you and says, you know what, uh, generally you're a good leader, but you're doing a poor job here. What? You don't love me. You've got to be able to take that. This was reiterated to me And last year, I visited a country where there was a very large mountain that I wanted to climb. And I trained pretty hard to be able to climb that mountain. And I didn't train as hard as I probably should have.
Oh no.
If I'm honest. Um, so halfway up this mountain, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble breathing wise. I'm in trouble in a host. I'm not. I'm realizing I'm not in shape enough for this mountain. I can't breathe. I'm having difficulties here. And long story short, I decided at that moment I'm either going to die on this mountain or I'm gonna make it up to the top. And that's a little dramatic, but that's the kind of toughness I was talking myself into. That, you know what, I'm probably not going to die taking another step up the mountain. I may feel like I'm going to die, and so I take one more step, and then I take one more step, and yes, it was slow going, but I told myself I wasn't going to stop. And one of the people that were with us said to me, they said, you know what, I didn't realize, and this was later on, but it said, I didn't realize how stubborn you were.
Hmm.
And they were trying to be kind, but the idea was this, is they saw how I wasn't in shape enough. They saw how, but it wasn't about my physical strength, because my physical strength wasn't enough. But being able to talk myself mentally into taking one more step when everything within my body was saying, you're done, you're done. And, you know, that one more step was all I needed to get one more step, to get one more step, to get one more step. And
you did make it.
I did make it. And
Spoiler alert, right?
yeah,
Spoiler alert.
I was the slowest, but I did make it up to the top. And I think if we're going to climb mountains spiritually, if we're gonna climb the mountains of lostness, and take the gospel to difficult places, and do things like leave our families back home, and try to raise children in cross cultural environments, if we're going to do those difficult things, it would be wise for us to develop the strength to be able to endure, because you raise an MK in a different culture, and I'll tell you, there's going to be hard days.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be days when you're going to want to pack it up and go home, and there's going to be days that'll be wonderful, but you have to make it through the difficult days to get to the wonderful days.
Absolutely.
There's I think it's a Haitian proverb I heard that's been just life altering for me, just a perspective wise. It's behind mountains are more mountains. And so many times we have this perspective that if I can just get through this thing, then it'll be okay.
It'll be
But
easier.
It'll be easier. But we're really setting ourselves up for failure with that mindset of, because we're always pursuing comfort.
Yeah.
And God doesn't promise us comfort. When you look at the saints in the Bible, I mean, they did not have the easiest pathways. And
Right.
we should just expect that, hey, you know what, there are going to be hardships that are coming, and that simple change of mindset prepares you for it. Like
Right.
when you're walking up that, you knew that the rest of it was going to be hard. If you were just like, oh, it needs to be easier, you're going to give up. And
Right.
so if we have that mindset, it really does just change. Like, you know what, it's going to be hard, but God's going to give me the strength for the next step, and the next step, and the next step. All right. So, what are some creative outside the box ministries going on around the world that God's using to open doors for the gospel?
This is a great question, and there's some exciting ones. I have to be a little bit vague, though, because some of the most exciting ones are in countries or in places where I can neither confirm nor deny things are happening.
Understand.
Okay.
But I think you've probably heard of the Uber scooter ministry, that we've got missionaries hanging around with people who mill around, and they have Uber scooters, and they've kind of started an Uber scooter ministry, and bringing coffee to Uber scooter drivers who are waiting in a certain area for a ride. And so they've got a lot of downtime and time to talk, and so it's kind of a social setting. Um, and I didn't know that there was such a thing, but it became a vehicle for. There's a pun for you. It became
Exactly.
a vehicle for ministry. That's one. Um, we have uh, people using veterinary medicine
Hmm.
um, to help in countries where agriculture and livestock are critically important, and in providing veterinary care, bringing in vets from the United States to help with veterinary care, which can be revolutionary to um, countries where there isn't veterinary care,
Mm.
right? We often think of medical missions. We don't think of
Right.
animal missions. Um, we've got ministries is simple, and this is something that people can do in the States. So here's one that's just CrossFit. We've got missionaries that have opened CrossFit gyms or participate in CrossFit, weightlifting. Some of these.
They're natural communities that are already
Mm-hmm.
established, and giving them a space for them to be able to accomplish those ministries within that context of relationship building.
And I think what our missionaries are good at finding is where are people gathering, finding whatever that affinity is that's bringing people together, and then using that as an opportunity to share the gospel. And so another one is there's a flower ministry.
Hmm.
By flour, I'm saying like baking flour,
Mm-hmm.
because at a certain time of year, this country, everybody bakes something, and so they have a ministry around giving everybody flour so that they can bake because everybody needs to bake. A simple thing, right? It's not super expensive. It's an easy thing, but everyone bakes at this certain time of year, and so everybody needs flour. So we can again do a ministry built around that affinity of everybody needs flour at a certain time of year. Um, so those are some of the, I mean, just weird ones. You wouldn't think flour and CrossFit and Uber scooters and veterinary medicine. But those are all missionaries finding creative affinities where people are gathering or people have needs to be able to meet those needs or gather in those communities and reach people for Christ.
That's cool.
That's really exciting. And we've absolutely loved this conversation. Thank you for taking the time to be on and share these things. It's been helpful to us. We've learned some new things and really look forward to people also learning from you guys.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for having
It's
us.
been a joy to be with you guys. I'm so grateful for the podcast and look forward to many episodes to come. And not to put pressure on you, but looking for many episodes to come. So thanks a lot, Kyle and Heather. We appreciate you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
guys.
Thank
It is our
you.
pleasure. And is there anything else that you'd like to just encourage, last word, just encouragements to missionaries?
Be steadfast and immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in Him.
Amen.
Amen. Very good.
Amen.
Well, thank you guys so much for being on. It's been a real joy. All
Bye.
right. Bye. Well, that's all for this show. And we want to thank you again for spending your valuable time with us today.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider taking just a moment and giving us a great review. Your review will help people find the podcast and allow these resources to encourage more people. If you took something valuable away from this episode, please share it with someone who would enjoy it.
If you'd like to find the show notes, blog posts, and free resources for ministry and leadership, as well as some information on my book, Overflowing, visit kylefarran.com. That's KYLEFARRAN.com. Hope to see you soon on a future podcast.